Michael walked down a long corridor toward the main hall of the Metropolitan Painting and Art Gallery to begin his new job. This job seemed like much more than just an ordinary night watchman role. The gallery director, Sarah, had warned him about minor incidents that had occurred during opening hours. Visitors reported hearing strange noises and claimed the portraits occasionally looked different. When Michael first heard this, he had smiled, thinking, exaggerated stories are always told in art galleries. However, as night fell and he found himself alone in the dimly lit gallery, an eerie unease began to creep over him. The interior of the historic building was quite spacious, and the dark spots along the walls deepened the shadows cast by the sporadically illuminated paintings. Michael, with his boots lightly tapping on the marble corridor floor, began his routine patrol in this silence. The paintings within the frames came from different periods and artistic styles. However, the most intriguing part of the exhibition was the mysteriously faceless portraits. Although the bodies were clearly painted with delicate brushstrokes on the canvas, the faces were nothing more than a blurry void. The gallery's art historian Daniel had remarked, "Perhaps these are unfinished works." Yet, visitors had claimed that the blank faces of the paintings gradually became clearer, and that the figures slowly gained identity. At first, Michael didn't pay much attention to these rumors. After all, his job was to protect these artworks at night and intervene if anything unexpected occurred. But later in the evening, as he wandered alone through the silent hall, his eyes caught a particular painting, and he found himself unable to look away. It was one of the most striking pieces in the exhibition, housed in a large, gilded, intricately decorated frame. The painting depicted a young man in old-fashioned attire, with his face left as an indistinct sketch. As Michael approached the painting, he noticed the brushstrokes were incredibly fine. It was as if the artist had meticulously detailed the body and surroundings but had left the face as merely a framework, an empty canvas. Suddenly, a faint scraping sound reached his ears from a distant corner. Michael turned around and shone his flashlight into the depths of the darkness. The frames on the walls stood motionless, as if they had never moved. Yet he was gripped by an unsettling feeling. He was certain something had shifted or changed. Scanning the room once more, he resumed his duties. The painting he always found himself returning to at the end of each round was the one in the gilded frame. Early in the evening, when he last looked at it, the figure's face was almost entirely blank. But about an hour later, when he returned, faint lines had appeared on the figure's face. The contours of the forehead, the ridge of the nose, and the hollows of the eyes were becoming more defined. The change was so subtle and delicate that it could have been a trick of his imagination. In his mind, Michael tried to reassure himself by thinking, "I'm just not familiar enough with the gallery yet. It's a play of shadows." Yet he couldn't ignore the fact that his heart was racing. The faster his pulse, the more he became attuned to every creak and crack, realizing that an odd wave of anxiety had enveloped him. As he continued his patrol through the silence, he decided to examine the other paintings. That's when he noticed something remarkable. The faces in the other portraits were also beginning to emerge. No matter how faint, the curves of the eyes and lips were becoming discernible. There was no logical explanation for this strange transformation. Who could possibly be coming into the gallery at night to make these changes? A few minutes past midnight, Michael decided to gather evidence to share with director Sarah and art historian Daniel. He took out his phone to photograph the painting, but encountered an odd result. In the photo preview, the paintings appeared normal, with no discernible details on the faces. He turned on the phone's flash and tried again, but the result was the same. The facial features that seemed more prominent in real life refused to show up on the screen. This chilling discovery puzzled Michael. "I'll show them in the morning," he told himself. But morning was a long way off, and the dark hours of the night were only just beginning. As time passed, the strange sounds grew more frequent. Tapping from the walls, the faint creaking of wooden floorboards, and sometimes a soft whisper-like noise emanating from corridors where no one was present. All of it unnerved Michael. He began to feel as if the paintings were watching him. Deciding to take a third lap of the long corridor, he once again passed through the main hall, and his eyes were drawn back to the gilded frame. This time, the figure's face was so clear it seemed almost familiar. When Michael squinted to get a closer look, he murmured, "No, this is impossible." Some features of the face bore a striking resemblance to his own. The shape of the forehead, the slight slant of the eyes, and the fine line at the corner of the lips. His heart pounding furiously. His breath came in short gasps. Trying to calm himself, Michael turned his head away and looked toward the dark end of the corridor. When he turned back to the painting, the expression on the face had become even more distinct. It felt as if he were staring at his own reflection. Overwhelmed by a mix of fear, curiosity, and anxiety, Michael was no longer sure what to feel. This must be a joke, he thought. But the gallery was closed, and he was the only one inside. As his breathing quickened, the dim light from the ceiling lamps cast flickering shadows. In the twists and turns of the dark corridors, the shadows seemed to grow larger, spilling from the walls and into the frames. Michael left the painting and hurried toward the main entrance, heading to the side room with the control panel to review the security camera footage. Perhaps the recordings would offer a clue. Yet, what he saw on the monitors was once again normal. The footage showed the paintings as they had always been, their faces blank. No matter how far back or forward he searched in the footage, the faces remained unchanged. By around 2 o'clock, he heard a sound, this time coming from the closed exhibition storage areas. It resembled the brittle creak of damp wooden doors. With his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, Michael passed dusty glass display cases and metal shelves, searching for the source of the noise. His eyes fell on an old easel leaning against the wall. On it sat an unfinished canvas and partially used paint tubes. The figures on the canvases appeared indistinct, yet in some way the same gaze seemed to linger in all of them. What is going on here? He asked himself. There were no open windows or drafts, yet the faint rustling of leaves echoed in his ears. Returning to the main hall, he was met with a scene that sent chills down his spine. The gilded frame appeared as if it had turned to face him. The lights in the hall were partially out, leaving much of the painting in shadow. But the face portion was inexplicably illuminated, locking eyes with Michael. This face now fully reflected his own. The arch of the eyebrows, the color of the irises, and even the trembling shape of his anxious lips were indistinguishable from reality. "How is this possible?" he murmured. He stumbled back, his shoulder brushing against another portrait frame. In that frame, another face had become distinct, seemingly looking at him with a faint expression. As minutes passed, the gallery seemed to lose its sense of reality. The tapping from the walls grew louder, turning into a low murmur, as if whispers were emanating from within the frames. Michael ran toward the corridor, wanting to escape, but every painting he passed bore different faces, staring at him with strange expressions. Some showed anger, some sorrow, and others gazed back at him with eerily familiar expressions. And with each step, the faces grew clearer, as if they were moving. When the lights flickered and finally went out completely, he was plunged into darkness. In that moment, he felt a cold breeze against his back. Feeling his way forward, Michael searched for the gallery's exit, but he nearly screamed when something grabbed his arm. Turning around, he saw only shadows shifting in the void. It was as if the very walls had come alive, trying to pull him inside. As his mind unraveled amidst the murmurs and whispers, he found himself thinking of that gilded painting. "No," he said, "I won't accept this." But his whisper was swallowed by the darkness. Suddenly, he was back in front of the gilded frame. Whether the painting had come to him or he had gone to it, he couldn't tell, but what he saw left him in utter terror. The figure in the painting was now entirely himself. The terror in Michael's pupils was mirrored perfectly in the reflection on the canvas. At that moment, he felt a shadow reaching out from the frame toward him. It seemed to pull him in. First, there was a tingling sensation on his face, then a coldness on his neck. He tried to pull back, but his muscles were beyond his control. The tapping from all the frames in the gallery rose into a deafening hum. The lights went out, and darkness engulfed the entire hall. The only thought echoing in Michael's mind was a desperate plea, "Help me." But no sound came out. It was as if his voice had been silenced. As his soul was drawn into the canvas, the last thing he saw was his face slowly disappearing from his own body. By morning, director Sarah and art historian Daniel arrived to open the gallery and noticed that the night watchman was nowhere to be found. This was concerning. When they began searching, they found the security room's lights on, but no one inside. The cameras were offline. As they walked through the halls, they saw that all the previously faceless portraits now had distinct features. One in particular caught their attention. A large, gilded frame displayed the figure of a young man who looked exactly like Michael. It was as if the painting was staring at them. Approaching the painting, they felt as though the expression in its eyes carried a silent plea for help. But the figure in the canvas remained nothing more than an image. Rumors about Michael's fate spread throughout the gallery. Authorities were notified and searches were conducted, but the young watchman had vanished. Some speculated that he had fled to another city, while others believed something terrible had befallen him. However, Sarah and Daniel couldn't shake the eerie atmosphere in the gallery, particularly when they looked at the gilded painting and saw Michael's face staring back at them. They were filled with an indescribable unease. Eventually, the exhibition was moved to a hidden section and closed to visitors. The management provided no explanation about the paintings, merely stating that the works were undergoing renovation and research. Over time, the rumors faded, and the evidence disappeared into the shadows. Yet, former employees of the gallery carried the memory of that night. Even years later, those who worked in the gallery claimed they could still hear the eerie tapping from the walls late at night. Perhaps Michael's soul remained trapped within a frame, calling for help. Or perhaps the ominous mystery held by those paintings would never fully be uncovered. And so, all that remained was the painting in the gilded frame hanging on the gallery wall. Now, the figure's face clearly bore Michael's expression. Though it didn't wear a humble security uniform, the body's contours and the frozen fear in its face turned into a hauntingly familiar trace. That portrait remained silently in the dark corner of the gallery, hung in a section never open to visitors. Sarah doubted anyone would ever dare to enter that building alone at night again. After all, sometimes the history and secrets of art transcend human understanding, and no one was willing to risk losing anyone else.